This summer, Instacart is bringing back your favorites from 1999 with prices from 1999. That means 90s prices on juice pouches that ought to be respected, 90s prices on boxed mac and cheese, and 90s prices on ham, cheese, and cracker lunches. Enjoy all those throwbacks and more at throwback prices, only through Instacart. $4.72 maximum discount per $10 of eligible items. Limit one offer per order. Expires 9/5 while supplies last. Discount based on CPI comparison.
We all belong outside. We're drawn to nature, whether it's the recorded sounds of the ocean we doze off to, or the succulents that adorn our homes. Nature makes all of our lives, well, better. Despite all this, we often go about our busy lives removed from it. But the outdoors is closer than we realize. With All Trails, you can discover trails nearby and explore confidently. With offline maps and on-trail navigation, download the free app today.
To get the Crime Writers on Aftershow right now, go to patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, investigative reporters journey into the darkest part of the web in pursuit of a child pornographer. We'll go back to our 2019 review of Hunting Warhead from CBC Podcasts and Norwegian newspaper VG. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
So, Kevin, what are we hearing on this classic rewind?
Yeah, so we got an email from Melissa Davis, and she said she thought this was a great series and worth talking about again. This is from our November 25th, 2019 show, and it's the investigative podcast series Hunting Warhead.
All right, so let's give that a listen. All right, moving on. Before we talk about the next topic in our podcast, I do want to give our listeners some warnings. We're reviewing Hunting Warhead, which features descriptions from investigators, victims, and perpetrators of child sex abuse, which can be triggering for some listeners. I was triggered myself by a lot of the material in this podcast. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse myself. So you need to understand that when we are talking about this topic, we really do understand the sensitivities here. And we also understand it might not be for everyone. However, it is a podcast worth talking about. So we are going to do that. If you want to avoid this discussion, you can feel free to skip ahead to our thumbs up or thumbs down review. CBC Podcasts and the Norwegian newspaper VG have teamed up for a disturbing investigation into the digital world of child pornography, as we are told on the podcast, child sexual abuse material. Hunting Warhead begins with an investigative reporter exploring the dark web who then stumbles upon Child's Play, a huge network of criminals around the world sharing images of child sexual abuse.
So you were interested in finding out who ran these sites, the administrators. Child's Play was this growing beast on the dark net.
Yeah.
How did you identify the administrator of Child's Play? What did you know about him?
Yeah, what we knew about the administrator on Child's Play was his name. Well, not his name, his username, which was Warhead.
Warhead.
Yeah, that's the only thing we knew about him.
Host Damon Fairless talks to investigators, academics, and the families victimized by those who molest children and distribute their photographs.
It's a little surreal to be talking about it so openly, especially with people who know as many details about how far this went.
I guess the natural question is like, why do you feel compelled to talk about the most intimate details of the worst part of your life? Like, why is it important to you?
I've thought about that a lot. It's difficult, but it's something that I felt if I don't do this, I'm really going to regret it.
Fairless even interviews Warhead himself. The podcast opens questions about the psychology of pedophiles, the technologies that enable them, and the tricky ethics around investigating and the techniques used in this particular case. Now, I do want to start just by saying you heard my trigger warning earlier, and you heard that, for me, Kevin, I think that this podcast was actually triggering for me. I also found it incredibly compelling and unlike anything I've ever heard before, and I think it's important. And I love the framing of this as an investigative journalism enterprise collaboration between Canadian reporter Damon Fairless and this Norwegian reporter Høyken Hodel, and sort of investigating this together, along with, of course, this other Norwegian who is an ex-hacker who now works with the publication.
Okay, you'll have to sign in. Okay. You're visiting VG, and you're from CBC.
I find collaborative journalism enterprises exciting, especially on this scale. In fact, Kevin, the podcast opens with a scene in Australia, which is no small thing. Like when you're talking about the kind of reporting that's involved, this Norwegian reporter talks about actually going to Australia to talk to these guys. What do you think of this just as a project and how it was sort of put together?
Well, I think it's indicative of the size of the crime and the criminal organization, that it's all over the world. And so in order to get to it and really investigate it, whether as a cop or as an investigative journalist, you do have to put a couple of miles on. And so, yeah, it's surprising that it covers Australia, Norway, and Canada, and the U.S., and virtually every place where you've got an internet connection. So, looking back on it, it shouldn't be surprising, but it is very admirable journalism.
Now, Lara, the podcast kind of sets up, we should just say it's a CBC podcast, so the episodes are probably too long. They probably explain things a little too thoroughly, and it's just not sort of like the style we're used to in terms of like tight storytelling. But when we kind of get to the sort of beginning of the story and what we're asked to grapple with, the podcast's first big ethical question is about this Australian operation, because what they end up finding out is that Warhead, who they're looking for, is no longer operating as the runner of this website, and he's been replaced by Australian investigators, cops, who are actively participating in the distribution in this child abuse online network. What do you think about that investigative dilemma?
That's tough. It's like anything like that, although it's more serious than when you have like an undercover drug cop who you know those cops have to use drugs if they're going to be believable when they're infiltrating and doing things like that. But in this case, where it's like actually continuing to distribute child porn and actually pretending to enjoy child porn and really portraying themselves as part of it's a tough call. And I think there was a part later in the series where one of the mothers of one of the victims is like, hell yeah. How many people did they get with this? They got like 200 people. So it's like, does the end justify the means? But then it's tough because then you hear, again, though, the numbers, you think, wow, that's a great dent that they're putting in that. But then it was like the numbers of people that are continuing to download this kind of porn, it's just growing. So it's like, can you even really stop it? So I think they shut it down at the right time. I think if it went on for too much longer, then it would have been a little bit harder to stomach.
Right. Now, I do want to, Laura, give you the same correction that we heard in the podcast. We are told, and they do make a good point, the Norwegian reporters, that child pornography is an outmoded term that implies consent and implies production on purpose that children are not able to participate in.
If you use the term child pornography, then that's a term describing the images as seen from the abuser's point of view. That this is images made to sexually arouse people. But that's not what they are. They are images of child abuse. So that's how we need to talk about them.
I think we should all be accepting, because that was the vernacular for our entire lives. And so, Laura, I'm fine with you using the term, but I think that our listeners just need to know, like, we did absorb that lesson in this podcast. Like, we get it, and we will be careful. Yeah.
And there was some really disturbing types of this that they talked about that were just horrific.
Yes. Yeah. It's explicit. Yeah. This podcast has some explicit moments
with like a child that died. I had a hard time. That was just awful.
Yeah.
But I will say, I would argue slightly that a child abuse image does not convey what the content actually is. That reads to me like it's photos of kids being slapped.
Well, it does. No, but that's
child pornography. I think we know exactly what.
Well, that's
kind of
our vernacular, and I think this Norwegian reporter.
They make a good point.
Yes,
but again, if you're going to talk about
what language ought to be versus
child sexual abuse is that's the term of choice, I think, in the U.S.
That's right. So, Toby, what do you think of that big question, the investigative question?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the big thing is that they're not producing these videos and images. It's mostly making available stuff that's already out there. So I think the argument that they make, and I think it's a fairly reasonable argument, is if we shut down this site, there'll be another site that will pop up or a group of sites that'll pop up. So it's not like these images are going to go away or not be available. But by maintaining this particular site, it does allow us to track people who are getting it and potentially bust people. And they do. I mean, they are successful doing that. I don't think it's a huge moral. Like I think it's a pretty good investigative technique, and it's not perfect. And I think, there are issues of making these images widely available, even if they would be anyway. I still think that's a difficult thing. But I think, unfortunately, when you're dealing with this kind of crime, I think it's hard to do it in a way that's much less questionable. And I think there's also, you got to think about how as law enforcement do you go about this, if not that way?
Well, I think we get a good lesson in that. In episode 1, we hear very precisely, probably too precisely and too long and detailed, about how this former hacker, who's now a journalist, is able to track people by cross-referencing usernames, by using metadata only. So he's able to build this huge database where he's knows when new photos have been uploaded. He doesn't have to look at them, but he's able to identify which ones are child abuse images and which ones aren't. And then he's able to do all this cross-referencing where they're able to identify specific perpetrators in their own country, and they're able to identify where the server farm is, which everyone said would be impossible. And he's able to identify who's running the site, which again is supposed to be impossible. It actually, I think, shows that the only way to investigate the stuff is to be in it. And I actually think the podcast makes a really good case for that. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the question is how do you ethically investigate it? Toby's right. There's no other way to do it. Much like cops would use cocaine that they seized in a previous drug operation in order to continue a new undercover operation. It's very similar to that, and there's really no perfect way of doing it. And I think Toby hit it right on the head that if you want to lay a trap, you have to use some kind of bait.
So we learn early in the podcast that Ben Faulkner, a Canadian man, was actually Warhead and that he had been arrested before this operation began. And we hear from, dare I say, the funniest and most sympathetic character I've met in a podcast in a long time, his poor roommate, Gordon.
They handcuffed me. They took me downstairs and they handcuffed me to a chair. And I sat there and I'm looking around and there's 15 to 20 police officers going throughout the building, looking at everything. It was a very, very busy place. And this female officer comes in. She walks in the door and looks at me and says, "How are you doing, Sonny?" And I looked up to her and I said, oh boy, Mondays.
And what was her reaction?
She said, "You're going to need that sense of humor, kid."
Laura, this poor guy was living with a mastermind pedophile who was also running these international sites and rings. What did you think of these scenes where he's just describing his experience living with this guy? He was always on his computer. They would make jokes about, how are you hacking Capital One? What did you think about those? I mean, first of all, can you just agree with me that poor Gordon, he did not sign up for this shit? All he wanted to do was go to the opera, for fuck's sakes.
So, oh my God. I don't know. I mean, I have to tell you, listening to it and listening to him describing what it was like living with him, I started getting I'm looking around at all these people I know and I'm like, those people, they could be doing the same thing and I would never know it.
Same.
And I was like, I bet that person seems a little suspicious. I wonder what they're looking at their computer. So I think what sort of surprised me about listening to him describe what it was like living with Ben was that Ben was so nonchalant the whole time that he was looking at this material online. not to be too graphic here, but if this is something that is, very exciting for Ben and arousing, like, I guess I was surprised that he wasn't showing any emotion the entire time that he was running the site and looking at all these images. If this is, you know what I mean?
Well, it was addiction and it was power. I mean, I think the podcast very clearly gets himself, because in that incredible episode 5, he's interviewing him a lot about this specific thing. And Ben admits it was partially the pedophilia, but it was also the power of controlling 1 million plus people at any given moment. And it was an addiction.
I think we so needed to have Gordon or a character like that.
Totally.
To, I'm not calling him comic relief, but in the classic sense where there is some sort of relief of tension.
Yeah.
Because this is pretty heavy stuff.
And he's not a victim. He's like
not
one
a
of the
victim.
only people in the podcast who's not directly a victim of any of
but
this.
I do think that the podcast goes up to another level at a certain point during Gordon's story. Because we hear all about him going to Washington, and we're like kind of like half laughing at him, like, you're going la-di-da, and you don't know that, the guy you're with is like the king of child pornography. And it isn't until towards the end when he finds out Ben wasn't there necessarily for child pornography. He went to rape a 4-year-old girl. That was a jaw dropper.
It was.
And I mean, that was mind blowing. And it just, everything after that, the stakes got so much higher.
That's why I feel so bad for Gordon. I mean, listen, I feel bad for everybody in this show except for Ben himself. Okay?
Sure.
Be real. Although we'll talk about the dilemma there in a minute. But Gordon, poor Gordon, was like, yeah, I want to go on a trip. Sure, this roommate situation sounds good. Like, like, he's earnest, he's open, and I just feel like he's a necessary character, like you said in the story. Can we just talk about one other moment that struck me as darkly funny about this story?
Mm-hmm.
Ben is arrested, I guess in Virginia or whatever, and he's with the other guy, Patrick, and they know that battering ram, they're in a stranger's house, the battering that's there for them, they know. And he's told, he's Canadian, and he's told,
he told me, he's like, if you help me, I can help you. And my dumbass, not knowing how the legal system works, was like, oh, okay, let me just decrypt everything for you and seal my fate.
if you help me, we'll help you. And he's like, okay. And he just immediately unencrypts all of his data and just gives it to them. And I'm like, this is the most Canadian arrest of a mastermind criminal that is possible. He's just like, sorry, here's my all my passcodes for my empire. I mean, maybe I was just grasping in this podcast for funny moments because I needed them so badly because it was so upsetting. I thought that was funny. Am I crazy that was just like...
No, it's you're right. It is a very Canadian thing. Okay, I'll give you all my stuff.
Toby, one of the things that this podcast tries to do, and Damon Fairless, I will say, I think he's a great narrator. I love his voice.
This is the story of the men who operate in the most disturbing corners of the internet. It's the story of the police who track down those men, who hunt undercover in the dark.
I have the one sheet for the podcast in front of me, and he looks a lot like his voice, which is always very satisfying when someone looks like you. Imagine that.
I mean, he looks rugged.
He looks rugged, yeah.
Like he climbs mountains on the weekend.
My only complaint about the setup for this podcast is I love when he sort of explains why it's important to tell these stories, because you can't understand something unless you actually look at it.
It's natural to want to turn away from uncomfortable stories. I get that, and I respect it. The problem is, you can't change what you don't understand. And you can't possibly understand the stories you avoid.
And you have to look at it in order to understand it, to be able to do something about it.
The more I've come to understand just how prevalent and how destructive child pornography is, the more compelled I am to cover it. As a journalist.
And he goes, I have to as a journalist. And then he says,
but also as a father.
And as a father. And I'm like, no, you don't need to add that. You don't need to add that one. Every time someone does that in a piece of reporting, I just want to be like, dude, it was good before you said that. You don't need to add it. You're a human being. Like, being a parent is the least interesting thing about an adult person. Many of us are parents. That's not what makes it interesting.
And it's like those people are like, I've got a daughter, so I really support the Me Too movement.
Exactly. But one of the things that Damon tries to do, Toby, and I think this is one of the most challenging things as a listener, especially for me as a survivor, he's not trying to get us to empathize with Ben. He talked to some of the world's foremost experts in this topic, in child sex abuse, in pedophilia, in, internet crimes like this. And the case that he is not necessarily trying to make, but I think challenging us to look at by introducing us to Ben's parents and doing all this research, is that Ben, we are conditioned to say pedophiles, lock them up, put them away forever, is also a human being with a story and a path that got him here. And I think Damon makes the case that Ben is one of the bad ones. Ben doesn't have remorse. Ben doesn't have, a lot of the turning points that could have changed things for him. But Toby, isn't it challenging to just sort of be faced with that question, that this category of people that we are conditioned to revile are also people?
First of all, I think Ben, the pedophilia is one of his problems, but, I think he's clearly a narcissist and he's got a lot of other things that I think kind of get him from his sexual desires to the sort of criminal, the hard to empathize with. Trying to envision what it would be like to really have your sexual attraction be towards kids must feel like some kind of curse or something. I mean, there's no place where that's acceptable. And I mean, it's just got to feel like, why?
And I remember it being, at the moment, it was like, oh, whatever. But as it started to dawn on me, it was just crushing. I don't even know how else to explain it. Just it's this existential misery that that you're never going to be, ever going to be who people think you are.
And then, there are people who try and suppress it, and I'm sure tons and tons do. You just don't really hear about it because that's not something you're going to talk to people about. And then, as the guy was saying, there are some who don't, and then the people who don't and who do act on it, they're the ones who feel remorse, and they're the ones who, feel entitled or feel that it's okay. And so it's tough. And I think it's also tough because I'm not really sure there's anything that's analogous to pedophilia, but there are mental situations where you can catch it early and you can work with people and try and get past it. And I don't think that really exists for pedophiles. I think it's mostly post being caught.
Yeah,
is when you start getting treated. So anyway, it's a tough one. And I think for some people who can't resist acting on it, you need to figure out a way to keep them away from kids.
I appreciate what the point he's trying to make, although I think as a society, we're not there yet. We're in an age now where we've moved away from just understanding everything about sex, gender, and sexuality as being binary. We're like, okay, there's multiple things going on, and whether it's different kinds of attractions or kinks or anything, that we're trying to find places where they go, and that maybe it's not an aberration like we would have thought of 50 years ago. It's this or that.
But pedophilia actually hurts people.
No. But see, this is what he's saying.
I know you're not making that case, by the way.
No. But this is the point the podcast is making. Take away the crime of acting on the feelings. Put that aside. The medical condition, the psychological condition, or the personality disorder, whatever that is that you're, like Toby says, that turns your desire from a healthy, adult-based sexual relationship, your attraction is to children or very young children. Something biological and scientific is happening there that we don't understand. But because it often comes with the crime.
Right.
That I don't think we're there yet to really sort of appreciate that medical condition or what, I don't even know how to describe it.
Right, because as
pedophilia as a thing to be studied, not in connection
with a crime.
I don't think we're there yet.
We've talked about this a million times around the Law and Order podcast that we do. And at SVU, every time someone says the word pedophile, it's like throw them away forever, right? And I'm not making the case that shouldn't be the case if someone's committing those crimes, but that also leads the way for there being no path to rehabilitation for someone who has not committed a crime or someone who has those feelings of isolation.
Or nor no path for prevention.
Correct.
Which was
exactly
the point they made.
Okay, so let's move on, because one episode of this podcast was without a doubt one of the most difficult things I have listened to in my adult life, in no small part because of my own experience. Laura, episode 4, Ben's cousin Jen. We hear that Ben at some point came to visit Jen. Her radar was always up. She was vigilant in many, many ways, and yet he managed to abuse her daughter. And she ends up making 2 victim impact statements, one which was addressed toward the judge in one court case. And then later in the podcast, after some time has passed and he's being sentenced for the online crimes, she makes a victim impact statement directly to him. This was difficult, right, Laura? This entire part of the story, it was almost like unbearable listening.
Yeah, it was horrible. And she was really, to me, one of, like, I felt like she was the most compelling, articulate character that they included. She just was able to really articulate in a way that it was hard to listen to, but she really communicated well, not only from the point of view of like when they were kids and they were younger and they were close, but then how she, started to sort of notice some things that just didn't feel right and how she was like trusting that feeling. But I mean, that was the thing that was so scary is even though she's trusting her gut feeling. And I was saying, that's like the big message here is listen to your gut. When you get that feeling and you're like, something's not right, it's not right. But I mean, I just can't even imagine how he was able to do that with her in the house.
She was right outside the door, Laura. She was right outside the door.
Listening, because she was listening. And she was because she was like, something's not right. I'm doing the laundry or whatever she was doing. But then when, fast forward to when they get she gets the phone call and, it's the authorities and they want to meet with her. And then going through that whole process and her just absolute disbelief. I mean, I really felt like it was awful because it's like you can't imagine that something like that could happen to your child in your house while you're there, while you were being quite vigilant and suspicious, and yet it happened. And I appreciated where she was coming from listening to this because I felt like I liked how she really called him out on what had happened in a way that some of the other people that were close to him didn't seem willing to do.
On another note about that, we often ding podcasts when they just let their subject just talk and talk, and there's no interjection or direction driven by the host. And Jen tells her story so well that they can just let her back. Yes.
My husband was gone most of this visit, so it was me and Ben in the evenings. And that's when we'd hang out and talk and watch Stranger Things. Anytime we got too close to him when he had his laptop, he'd grab the top and bend it towards his chest. And I'd be like, dude, he's okay, I'm treating him like a brother. I don't want to see your porn, dude. I don't want to see the boobies and stuff on your computer. And he's like, ha, ha, ha. And I was like, no, really, it's probably like some stupid Minecraft, isn't it? And he's like, yeah. It was always one of those situations where I'd be like messing with him and he'd just roll with it effortlessly.
He doesn't need to get involved, interjecting or filling in the blanks or moving it along. It's edited so well that he doesn't need to be there. And it's not accidental because Damon does get involved in that kind of storytelling in the other episodes. But they knew enough to kind of just let her tell her story because it was more powerful that way. So sometimes that works when it's done well. But again, of course, it is the CBC, and they all went on. Maybe they could have been 10 or 15 minutes
shorter. With every subject, yeah.
More is more with
Especially
the CBC.
Especially with our Norwegian reporters.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need I understand it was a collaboration, and the way they did it was like, we're going to sit down and talk, and it was those sections were just too long. Like, we had the information, and then we just expanded on the information, and that was... those were too long, and also the levels.
Too long, but I will say the substance was good.
Substance was good,
but
those were too long, and the levels were not great in those sections. The field tape, put the microphone right on that guy, man. Just do it, because I kept having to turn the volume up and down.
Yeah,
it's my one complaint.
It was bad with the telephone interviews.
Yes,
they weren't normalized.
Yes, but that being said, there's a lot to really praise about this project, I think, and what it tried to accomplish. I think that Damon Fairless's stated intention, as well as the Norwegian reporter stated intention of looking at stories about people who commit these crimes and just being relentless and not looking away. Like, I disclosed at the beginning of this part of the podcast that I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I know most of my friends are too. All but 2 of my adult female friends are. I haven't really talked to a lot of the men about that, but a lot of the women, we all talk about it. none of us are comfortable talking about it because we don't talk about it, because we don't report on it, because we don't have stories like this that just make it a thing that is okay to discuss and look at and dissect. If we suspected someone in our family was looking at this material on their computers, our first reaction would be to slam the lid closed and be like, you go see a psychiatrist or we're not talking about this anymore or something, right? It's so painful and it's so difficult. But I think, and I really do believe this, a huge part of the reason why it's so painful and difficult, even though so many of us share the experience, is because we don't talk about it. And the only way to talk about it is to, I don't want to say normalize it, but normalize talking about it. And, you know, the podcast does a tremendous service there, which is why I can maybe forgive some of the production stuff a little more.
Hello, I'm Dax Shepard.
And I'm Monica Padman.
And we love talking to people. Every Monday and Wednesday, we sit down with actors, authors, scientists, really anyone interesting, and have real, honest conversations about life, success, failure, and everything in between. We get vulnerable, we get nerdy, and yes, I occasionally overshare.
Me too. And I would say more than occasionally.
Yeah, but some of our favorite stories actually come from you, our listeners. That's why we created Armchair Anonymous.
Yes, every Friday on Armchair Anonymous, we get to hear your funniest, weirdest, most jaw-dropping confessions. And boy, have you delivered.
Yeah, from disastrous dates to family secrets to the time you accidentally joined a cult or evacuated without authorization.
We really have heard it all.
Yes, we have, and we love it. So come pull up a chair. Listen to Armchair Expert wherever you get your podcasts.
This summer, Instacart is bringing back your favorites from 1999 with prices from 1999. That means 90s prices on juice pouches that ought to be respected, 90s prices on box mac and cheese, and 90s prices on ham, cheese, and cracker lunches. Enjoy all those throwbacks and more at throwback prices, only through Instacart. $4.72 maximum discount per $10 of eligible items. Limit one offer per order. Expires 9/5 while supplies last. Discount based on CPI comparison.
Oh, I'm not switching my team to some fancy work platform that somehow knows exactly how we work. And its AI features are literally saving us hours every day. We're big fans. And just like that, teams all around the world are falling for Monday.com. With intuitive design, seamless AI capabilities, and custom workflows, it's the work platform your team will instantly click with. Head to Monday.com, the first work platform you'll love to use.
We all belong outside. We're drawn to nature, whether it's the recorded sounds of the ocean we doze off to, or the succulents that adorn our homes. Nature makes all of our lives, well, better. Despite all this, we often go about our busy lives removed from it. But the outdoors is closer than we realize. With All Trails, you can discover trails nearby and explore confidently with offline maps and on-trail navigation. Download the free app today.
Than usual. All right, so let's do what we do. Let's give our thumbs up or thumbs down review for Hunting Warhead from the CBC, a complicated and dark and deep look at a troubling criminal enterprise. Laura Bricker, I'm going to start with you. Thumbs up or thumbs down for Hunting Warhead from the CBC?
I'm going to give it thumbs up. It was something that I think was an important listen. It was really, really hard to listen to. It was really upsetting. I'm going to have to go watch like a week of Hallmark movies after this because it was heavy and it was hard. But it was really interesting to hear about how, the whole hacker community works, in a way that I hadn't heard before, and how these journalists were able to sort of infiltrate that and then tell the story. It was interesting, but it was a tough listen. So it's a thumbs up, but it's be prepared.
What about you, Toby Ball? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Hunting Warhead from the CBC?
Yeah, I'll give it a thumbs up too. I think it's actually an incredible bit of journalism. My only thing is if you're worried that you might be triggered or you think it might not be the kind of thing you want to listen to, you're probably right. It's some tough sledding at times. So that aside, I think it's an incredible piece.
Yeah, I'm giving this a big thumbs up. I really enjoyed listening to it as much as one can enjoy listening to a podcast about this subject because of the journalism. The journalism is top notch. All of my quibbles about this podcast are about production. letting interviews go too long, making sure the Norwegian subjects taped in the field, they need hotter mics or better levels because the difference between Damon's narration and theirs made it so I had to turn the volume up and down. And one other production quibble, which I wouldn't normally make, except this podcast is so excellent and I so respect everything about it. It has kick-ass sound design that is too soft for the podcast. The theme song is amazing and kick-ass. They have this little special effect that's like this little digital flutter that they do during like moments as a beat. And it's soft. Like it should be.
I didn't notice it.
It should punch through.
End,
Whoever is doing the mixing on this podcast, lean in. Don't make it so loud that it's hard to hear the voices. But don't be afraid to have your theme song and your effects match the levels of your narration at certain moments to really, really drive it home, because the sound design that is there, the music, the sound effects, the scoring is really, really good. It just could have been more. Take away some of the exposition, add more of that sound design. That's my one production note. But I think this podcast is important. I think it's going to go on the next Mount Rushmore of important true crime podcasts. It's different than anything else I've heard. It's a true international journalism investigation. Kevin Flynn, what about you?
So you liked it?
I really liked it. It triggered me. I cried many, many times listening to it. Personally, I loved it. Kevin, what about you?
I am a thumbs up. I don't think it is as explicit as believed, but it is just as jarring and probably even more important. This is a disturbing must listen or a disturbing not listen. It serves the scope and importance of the story, and it moves beyond the crime into a larger issue that hasn't been tackled anywhere. A fascinating investigation, a digital investigation, a cyber investigation, a criminal investigation looking at one person and how it affects a larger issue. It is quite something. Definitely a thumbs up.
Wow, Kevin, that was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the investigative effort that went into that. I mean, that's why some of these podcasts like really stand out and stand the test of time. So.
Well, this one stands the test of time for me. I remember thinking, and I said, it was very different sounding. It had some of the most interesting scoring of a podcast I heard. And this series is just very, very memorable.
Yeah, so if you have an idea about a podcast or a documentary or something else that we have talked about on our show, feel free to drop us a line and make that request. Just go to our Crime Writers on Facebook discussion group, reach out on the socials, Instagram or X or Blue Sky, or you can email us. You can email Rebecca at crimewriterson.com.
Or crimewriterson@gmail.com.
Yeah, because everybody likes the Gmail address.
This show was recorded in Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement, where we also complain about Mondays. Am I right, Kevin?
You're right.
On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
Partners in Crime Media.
Possibility means you have a chance.
Passion opens the door to all possibilities.
When I feel like anything's possible, I feel kind of giddy.
I want to be an astronaut, an artist, an actress.
To visit another country.
All I need is a backpack and a pair of shoes, and I'll find a way.
That I'm able to do anything I set my mind to.
I've never felt like more things are possible than right now.
In the right shoes, anything's possible.
DSW, countless shoes at brag-worthy prices. Imagine the possibilities.